Some artists make paintings. Dan Hillier made portals, gateways into spirituality. He worked like a quiet alchemist. Victorian engravings, old encyclopedias, antique illustrations, cut apart with a blade, reassembled into beings that feel both ancient and brand new. Saints with antlers, women crowned by woodland, gentlemen dissolving into ghost trees, icons that look like they were found in a future monastery built on the ruins of empire. His images don't simply hang, they hover, they stare back. They feel hauntingly familiar because they can speak in archetypes we recognize before we can explain them. Mother, mask, forest, halo, wound, bird, ritual, and the long human yearning to feel part of something larger than the self. Dan Hillier was born in Oxfordshire in 1973. He died in February 2024 after a short illness, leaving behind a body of work that still feels alive, like it's unfolding in the viewer. And if you want one sentence that unlocks the whole thing, he gave it himself. My work is an extension of my explorations of mythology, the arts, meditation, mystery traditions, psychedelic plants, and nature in general. That's not an artist statement, it's a map. Dan grew up in Oxfordshire in a family that encouraged art. The kind of environment where making isn't an indulgence, it's simply how you process existence. The impulse began early, drawing, collage, arranging worlds out of fragments. Later he studied illustration and graphic arts at Anglia Ruskin University in Cambridge. Illustration gives you discipline, you learn composition, tone, the weight of line, but Hillier didn't stay inside the neat fence of commercial image making. He used skill as a vessel for something else, something more mythic, more spiritual, more atmospheric. Even then you can sense what he would become, not a painter of scenes but a maker of icons, images that don't just show you something but do something to you. Woodsman arrives like an early omen, 2011, and Hillier is already speaking in archetypes. The Woodsman is an old figure, guide, hunter, the one you meet at the edge of the map where the tidy world ends. A human mask on a head made of bird feathers and a snake tail. The message? That human beings are built from the very nature around us. that we can't escape that nature even if we try. In Hillier's hands, the woodsman doesn't simply stand in nature. He becomes the point where nature begins to look back. The work feels like an initiation. Human identity tested against wilderness and found porous. It's one of the first big signals that this artist isn't aiming for illustration. He's building myth. He's making a door. On the head of the woodsman is a jackdaw perched right on the ram's horn. And yet the face of the woodsman is at peace with nature and himself. Then came the travels, and this is where the biography turns into a kind of spiritual apprenticeship. Hillier travelled through Asia, and those journeys weren't mere sightseeing. They read like a pilgrimage because Asia didn't simply offer him inspiration, it offered him a different relationship to images. In the West, an image is often treated like a product. It's made, it's consumed, it's replaced. But in much of Asian sacred art, Tibetan, Indian, Himalayan devotional traditions, an image is a practice. An icon is not decoration, it is concentration, a doorway for the mind, a way of holding stillness. And you can feel those lessons later in Hillier's work. The frontal stillness of his figures, the sense of devotional presence, the geometry of halos and symmetry, the way his images feel less like illustrations and more like altarpieces for the psyche. If you've stood in a temple and watched how people look at an image, not quickly, not casually, but with a whole body of attention, you start to understand what Hillier was absorbing. His later art often behaves like that. It demands a certain kind of looking and rewards you with a quiet shift inside. He didn't come back from a travel with souvenirs. He came back with a new visual ethic. Hillier began selling prints from East London markets. This gave him the opportunity to get feedback where you learn immediately whether your work has gravity, whether strangers will stop, whether an image can reach across the noise of a street and touch someone. He built his audience, one encounter at a time, slow, grassroots, human. And when his work began to spread into galleries and festivals and bigger rooms, it carried that market stall honesty with it. It never felt aloof, never sneering, never coldly conceptual. He also spoke about focus as a kind of resistance, about long concentration in a distracted world being almost radical. That line matters because it tells you what the studio really was for him. Not production, not content, not devotion, scissors as meditation bell. Hillier's signature technique is collage, but not collage as chaos. It's collage as alchemy. He would mine Victorian engravings, the era's encyclopedias, anatomy plates, natural history drawings, moral illustrations, and then cut them apart until their original certainty broke open. He reassembled fragments into figures that feel like they've crossed a border between human and animal, between portrait and relic, between psyche and landscape. Then he refined pen, ink, hand colour and often gold leaf, that ancient devotional material that changes the emotional temperature of an image instantly. Gold turns the surface into something halfway between artwork and object of reverence. And that's the crucial thing. Hillier didn't use Victorian imagery as nostalgia. He used it like an archaeological layer, a skin he could peel back to reveal something older underneath. Because Victorian images carry a kind of official reality, the world catalogued, controlled, known. Hillier cut that control apart and let the mystery back in. By 2014, Hillier's language crystallizes into something sharp and unmistakable. This is where biography and art analysis become the same story. Meta lands like a turning key. Even the title tells you what's happening. Meta. The self reflecting on itself. The image becomes a mirror holding a mirror. The mind folding back to watch itself watching. And visually it carries that Hillier quality of icon-like stillness. A composed central presence assembled from antique fragments, yet somehow intensely modern. The old paper becomes a new being. Is it the archangel Metatron? The being's eyes are the geometric symbol for the flower of life, a deeply spiritual symbol found all over the world, and in its hands it holds Metatron's cube. What's remarkable is how the work embodies his spiritual influences without announcing them as spiritual. It's not didactic, it's not preachy, it simply behaves like an icon behaves. It slows time, it makes you look longer than you intended, it creates a hush in the room. That's the pilgrimage influence showing itself, not as style but as function, an image as a container for attention.
There's a slow chain that pulls the light to you, with scissors and glue and iconic hue. A slow grace that takes taste to form. It forms slowly, like a distilled liquid. Alchemy and artistry, spiritual chemistry. Alchemy and artistry, spiritual chemistry.
The same year, his imagery flares into broader public culture, the royal blood era. This is the moment Hillier becomes visible to people who might have never set foot in a gallery. Having his artwork on Royal Blood's debut album raised his profile generally. His unique aesthetic got him a few different commissions after that. The cover artwork for Daryl Gregory's novel Revelator, the artwork for the album Holy Hell by the band The Architects, and the artwork for a BBC series called Requiem. He doesn't get seen by simplifying. He gets seen because his symbols are strong. His images are built like sigils, immediate, memorable, charged. They feel like they existed before you saw them, which is exactly what archetypal art does when it's working. So his rise isn't an industry story, it's a resonance story. His private myth language had enough voltage to travel. And here's the emblem that carried that voltage out into the wider world, Pachamama. In 2014, Hillier's image became the album cover for the band Royal Blood. The kind of cultural placement that doesn't just feature an artwork but brands an era with it. Suddenly his iconography wasn't only in galleries and print rooms, it was in bedrooms, record shops, headphones, tour buses, held in people's hands like a talisman. What's so telling is that he didn't need translation, it worked instantly. Frontality, power, mythic, stillness. It proves something rare. Hillier's symbols weren't niche, they were native. They spoke to people who didn't even know they were hungry for that kind of sacred image language. And in the Pachamama image, her hair is the very stars themselves. Amongst them, subtle, is the symbol for Vesica Pisces, two circles intertwined, sacred symbol of union. Now we reach the years where Hillier's mature voice feels fully lit from within. The ceremony era, where his work enters major exhibition spaces and carries the full weight of his icon-making intent. This is where Hillier's images begin to feel explicitly like rites, halos like solar wombs, botanical growth as spiritual revelation, faces becoming landscapes, identity treated as something fluid, not fixed. And this is where Undreamt enters the pipeline, perfectly placed. Undreamt is a title that feels like a whisper at the edge of sleep. Not the dream you remember, but the dream you never reached. The part of the mind that hasn't even become symbolic yet. The seated figure is the figure of a nude woman overlaying a dryad-like being. She holds another mask in her hands, eyes star-speckled and staring, ready for another dream of another life, maybe a human one. His figures often look like they've been paused mid-transformation, not fully human, not fully other, suspended between categories. They carry a hush that isn't empty, it's charged, like walking into an ancient wood and realizing the silence isn't absence, it's presence. If meta is consciousness folding back on itself, Undreamt is consciousness peering into the fog beyond itself. It's also where Hillier's spirituality becomes clearest in emotional terms. A willingness to face the unknown without forcing it into tidy meaning. He once suggested that some things are better left off open, and his art lives by that rule. It doesn't close the mystery, it keeps the door ajar. And then, in 2017, Mother and Child appears. One of the clearest examples of Hillier's gift for taking a familiar sacred template and reopening it into living ambiguity. He borrows the posture of devotion, the timeless silhouette of tenderness, but he doesn't leave it in doctrine. He shifts it into something archetypal and human. Motherhood as protection and nature, as vulnerability, as cosmic process, a process of nature flowering into human motherhood. It's nature cradling humanity. This is Hillier's compassion made visible, the sacred not as certainty, but as relationship. A form of love that doesn't deny darkness, it simply holds it.
Nature fructum vitae afferens Filii tui sumus necte unquam obliti lumen tuum quarimus veritatum quarimus tie culimus Mater infante divinia nova Mater infante divinia nova.
By 2021, something in Hillier's work shifts, not away from darkness or light, but towards different relationships with them. The imagery feels more distilled, more patient, more quietly hopeful, and sometimes more colourful, but also still more mysterious. This work feels like a statement of faith. Not religious faith in doctrine, but faith in the possibility of transformation. It says the world may be ancient, wounded, overgrown, but it still regenerates. It still makes green. It still surprises. And the mystery of ancient places of nature still endures in its presence. If you want to tie it into biography, by this point Hillier has lived long enough to know that change isn't a clean beginning. It's usually growth inside complexity, inside history, inside what's already tangled. And this is where the artist feels less like a conjurer of sublime relics and more like a keeper of living cycles, decay and renewal, shadow and bloom, grief and tenderness sharing the same roots. In the heart of the woman figure is a dark forest, its untamed nature in feminine form, mysterious and gazing at us, but alive with its own grace. And in the same late period breath comes, the light. A work that feels like weather breaking, not a sugary optimism, not everything is fine, but the kind of light you trust because it arrives after you've stared at the cloud long enough. This is Hillier's gold at its most meaningful. Not decoration, but illumination as vow. Look longer, stay with it, there is still radiance here. Placed beside new growth in the old forest, it reads like a paired statement. Regeneration below, revelation above. The forest doing its slow work, the sky answering in its own language. But look deeper, it is the golden light of the spiritual heart, the soul answering the shroud of ego with its own light. Loving, forgiving, a state of longed for grace. And then Dartmoor. In 2022, Hillier moved from London to Dartmoor, seeking closeness to family and to nature. And it is almost unbearably fitting because his art always carried a wilderness inside it. Now he chose to live beside an actual one, with the clear skies of the moorland offering its own inspiration. Dartmoor is a place of deep folklore and ancient human habitation, a place of Neolithic spirituality and a vast sweeping landscape. It's myth land, granite and weather, a place that doesn't flatter you, a place that makes you feel time, a place of inspiration. Imagine the artist, the man who spent decades building forests inside faces, stepping out into a landscape that is all wind and tors and sudden sunlight. Imagine him walking, looking, breathing, letting the moor's silence tune his nervous system back to something older. It feels like a homecoming, not just geographically but spiritually. His art always said, you belong to nature, whether you remember it or not. Dartmoor is a place that makes remembering unavoidable. And then the illness comes, and this is where Hillier's final words hit so hard. He wrote of gratitude, of seeing the riches of his life, of love for a world and for himself, and he offered a blessing, not narrow but universal. May all beings be free, may all beings know true peace. May all beings live in safety and free from harm. May all beings know true love and true freedom. Dan Hillier. And then in 2023, the Black Madonna arrives. Our Lady of the Radiant Darkness, a title that feels like a whole cosmology. This is Hillier, distilled to essence. Devotion without dogma, reverence without certainty. Darkness not as evil, but as gestation, the fertile unknown where transformation begins. Radiant darkness is the Hillier paradox at its highest altitude. Light held inside shadow, grace that doesn't need answers. If Woodsman is the threshold at the forest edge, and Meta is the mind washing itself, and Undreamt is the fog beyond symbol, then Our Lady is the final sanctuary, the place where the unknown becomes protective, where mystery becomes mother. This reminded me of the Black Madonna statues I saw in Lanzarote, complete with waning crescent moon, and the glorious reflecting silver light of the surface of the sea. It's the depth of the ocean in mystery, but also respect for the unknown and faith. and it's my favourite piece of art by Dan Hillier. Dan Hillier's legacy is not just that he made striking images, it's that he restored something many people secretly crave. The return of the sacred without dogma. The return of myth without escapism. The return of nature not as scenery but as kin. He took an archive built for control and certainty and cut it into a language of mystery and metamorphosis. He proved that collage can be cosmology. And he did it with patience, with craft, with devotion, with a quiet insistence that attention matters. His art teaches you wordlessly to slow down, to let your identity become porous for a moment, to stand in the doorway between human and wild, to feel the old forest inside you, and to sense, even in darkness, a kind of radiance. Because in Hillier's world, darkness is not the opposite of light. Sometimes it's the place where the light is born.